Hello, good evening everyone. Welcome to the 7th debate of term, I think. It's now week 7. Welcome to the 7th debate of term. This house believes the sexualisation of the music industry is bad for society. As you will have seen if you've looked at the order papers, we have rather a large number of changes to the billing that was originally announced, even up until yesterday. I wouldn't like to speculate, but I'm sure at least one of our speakers is just hungover from the Grammys yesterday, from the Brits yesterday. But we have some fantastic speakers who have stepped in at the last minute, so I'm sure you will enjoy their speeches. If you are joining us on Twitter tonight, and I'm just going to have to apologise for this in advance, the hashtag is #CUSSexymusic. If you have any better suggestions, why not tweet those at us? Really, we can only improve on that. As always, there are ways to contribute during the debate. Those are detailed on the back of the order paper, so do have your say. But without further ado, I will hand over to Mary-Anne Hobbs, who is a DJ, a music journalist, and hosts the BBC Six Music Weekend Breakfast Show and her Six Music Recommended Show. Mary, thank you very much.
Such a great honour to be here, and thank you all so much for coming out. I guess I could just say 2 words to you tonight. And those 2 words would be David Bowie, and then I could leave the stage. But you know, part of me feels that, I don't know, maybe you would feel that you'd been cheated. And I worry, actually, about all of you. I worry that you are the generation that's being cheated. You're being cheated environmentally. You're being cheated financially. And crucially, you're being cheated artistically. When you talk about the sexualisation of music, what you're really talking about is a feat of marketing. You need to understand that this has almost nothing to do with music whatsoever. I feel that the issue is a much, much broader one, and I feel that tonight what we're going to do, or certainly I am going to do, is take more of a widescreen view. I feel that what's really happening right now is that the arts are being crushed under the heels of capitalism, and we're entering an age where artists face a greater struggle than ever before. I was watching this fantastic documentary about a painter called Jean-Michel Basquiat. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his work. And he spoke about a move to New York City. And he went there with absolutely nothing at all. He went there to become a painter. And he was nurtured by that environment. The environment allowed him to become what he dreamed of. And he spoke about all of his friends, the artists and the musicians that he met in New York. And he talks about the fact that everybody put on gigs, they put on exhibitions, they put on shows, and everybody went to one another's events, they turned up. And slowly but surely, everybody became the people, the creative people that they wanted to be, because the environment allowed for that. When I moved to London with absolutely nothing at all, nothing. And I lived on a bus in a car park for a year. And I found my way in the city and wrote a little fanzine, sent it to the editor of Sound's music paper, and got a job there when I was just 19 years old. Again, the environment allowed for that. I was able to live on a car park. And I was actually still living on that bus, and I had no fixed abode when I was first flown to New York City to write the first story that I did do for that music paper. And I remember running through the streets of London with my brother. I remember laughing, holding hands, and we knew where every exhibition was. We knew where every gig, every club was. And we were just kind of wrapped up in the beauty of the whole experience, And I remember the last time that I actually went to London, I cried. I walked past the site of this incredible venue called the Astoria, which had been ripped out at the roots. And I couldn't believe that this was actually being allowed to happen, And there are so many other great venues at the moment that are being destroyed. Plastic People, the 12 Bar Club, Madame Jojo's, and Earl's Court, all in the space of 1 year. And This is to make way for so-called development, the building of luxury apartments which push the creative community further and further and further away from those environments that nurture them. And I think for me, this kind of destruction is very similar to what's happening environmentally. It feels the same as watching the ice caps melting in the Arctic. And do you know, I remember the first of these clubs that was destroyed, a club that was really important to me in my youth, a club called the Marquee. And it gave way to some very expensive lofts and a really terrible restaurant. And it's interesting, I went down Wardour Street the other day, the same street, just to have a look at the environment. And what I saw there were lots of very, very expensive coffee houses and restaurants. And I thought, let me just do a little test. I was going to meet my brother, and I thought, I want to look through the windows of these places, and I want to see how people are feeling. I want to look into their faces, and that's what I did. And I saw people who were very well dressed, but I saw people looking very anxious. Nobody looked joyful. Nobody looked happy at all. And I thought, people are being sold this kind of facade. They're not actually feeling anything. It's not in there, you know. They're sitting on a very attractive chair. They might get fed, but absolutely nothing else in terms of real, genuine experience is going to happen, you know. And I looked at their faces and I thought, you're being cheated, aren't you? And you damn well know it. I listened to a talk that Brian Eno gave actually very recently, and he said that we progress now faster in 1 month than we did in the entire of the 1400s. But you know, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of society are we actually becoming? We build these gigantic media streams. You know, we have these omnipresent, relentless digital torrents that flow through our lives. But for a large part, we run pure trash down them. And I had a dream the other day, you know. I went to an amusement park in my dream. And at this amusement park, you could see nature. Nature had been destroyed everywhere else in the world. You could only see it in this one park. And I was on a little set of cars with my mother. And we came across this beautiful sight. It was a river, a waterfall. And my mother turned to me and she said, oh God, let's just jump out of the car right now. Let's go for a walk down the river. And the guy who worked at the amusement park said, oh, you can't do that. That's just a hologram. It's not real. And I just wondered to myself, how long is it going to be before our creative environment is exactly the same? So yes, the sexualization of the music industry is bad for society. I mean, it's really, really disturbing for me to see these young people used as mannequins by marketing men who are greedily eyeing the kind of revenue that the porn industry generates and wondering how they can assimilate that. But as I say, you need to view this in the context of a much broader issue. And my question to you tonight is, how important is your creative life? How important is your connection with the sensuality of music? How important are these environments where real artists flourish that are being destroyed, crushed under the wheels of capitalism? You really need to think about this. And I would say that for me, and for my audience, which numbers, I don't know, maybe 1 million people a week, music is really still a primary source of information and inspiration in our lives. I mean, it deals with the poetic, the political, and the planetary concerns. And I will fight for a platform that for music that actually really, really matters, until my last breath. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Right, I will now hand over to our first opposition speaker tonight. Lola Olufemi is the BME rep for the Women's Campaign, the comment editor at TCS, and is heavily involved with FLY, a group for self-identifying women of colour in Cambridge. Lola, thank you very much.
So it's undeniable that the media we consume has a major effect on the way we view society. It defines norms and values, it influences behaviour, and provides us with markers and standards of acceptability. The proliferation of sex and sexual desire in the music industry is not a new phenomenon because concerns with sex are not new. They have and always will exist. And there's a long history of men displaying ownership of women's bodies in the music industry. Behind the scenes, men own record companies and are producers, and this ownership is often reflected in the lyrics of music. This ownership also cuts across genre, so Baby It's Cold Outside by Frank Lesser, which came out in 1994, demonstrates extremely worrying understandings of consent, for example, and rap videos are often held up as examples of instances of male ownership over women's bodies and their sexualities. I'm someone who's very invested in feminism and feminist activism, and it's interesting to look at the ways that men have controlled women's sexuality historically, in ways that are coded and not coded, in ways that are visible and invisible. Men have always been sexual agents. They've been allowed the freedom to explore their sexuality and have documented this in film, poetry, and a number of different art forms. Women's sexuality, on the other hand, has always been policed. Ideas of chastity and virtue held women back from expressing sexual desire. From these notions, we get ideas of virginity and purity. It's why wedding dresses are white. It's why we're still kind of prudish about sex education for girls. There have always been kind of coercive attempts to shame or critique women for portrayals of sex or demonstrations of sexual desire. And it's one of the reasons why people still don't view sex work as a legitimate form of work. So the basis of my argument hinges on the idea that there's a vast difference between sexualization and sexual objectification. Sexualization is the process of making something sexual, exploring or becoming aware of sexuality. There's nothing inherently wrong with exploring sex and sexual desire, especially if you're a woman or non-binary person, especially if it's framed in an artistic context. So demonstrating a desire to understand your own body and how it interacts with others in a patriarchal society where historically that right has been withheld from you is a radical act. Sexualization itself is radical because it's an individual act. It doesn't require two parties. Sexual objectification, on the other hand, is the removal of someone's agency by turning them into an object for consumption without regard for personality or character or dignity. So Martha Nussbaum has identified 7 features that are involved in the idea of treating someone as an object, and I'm just going to say 4 of the ones that I think are most interesting. So instrumentality, the idea of the treatment of a person as a tool for the objectifier's purposes. Denial of autonomy, the treatment of a person as lacking in autonomy and self-determination. Ownership, the treatment of a person as something that is owned by another, can be bought or sold. And the denial of subjectivity, so the treatment of a person as something whose experiences and feelings, if any, need not be taken into account. The latter has been, so sexual objectification has been justly critiqued by feminists because of the gendered power dynamics involved. Historically, in music videos and other art forms, men have acted as subjects with agency and women as objects who are acted upon or who exist to prop up a kind of performative masculinity. This is a process that requires two parties, and this is what one might argue is bad for society. I think it's important to make that distinction between the two phenomena because they're not the same thing, and the motion is asking us if sexualization of the music industry is bad for society. So sexualization as it's defined, allowing women to explore their own sexuality, is not the same as men using women as overly sexualized background props. So sexualization of the music industry is good for society because women reclaiming narratives about sex that have been historically withheld from them poses a fundamental threat to the patriarchal society that we live in. Women reclaiming narratives about sex shift dominant ideas that we cannot and should not be sexual, that there's a right or wrong way to explore sex, or that there's anything inherently shameful about sex. So sexualization as it's defined, allowing the women's space and autonomy and agency to explore sex is an inarguable right. Now, increasing instances of sexualization in the music industry are good for society for a number of reasons. if we've agreed that media defines norms and values, sexualization brings sex into a public space, meaning that it's no longer taboo. It forces us to confront issues of sexuality, sex education, consent. The only reason I'm able to critique a Baby It's Cold Outside is because I've seen representations of women's sexuality that doesn't rob them of their autonomy. And generally, I think we're kind of a retrospective age. We like to look back and talk about how good music used to be, when really those were times of constraint in terms of women's ability to portray their sexual autonomy. So why shouldn't women be able to link their music to sexual desire if they want to? The more open we are about sex, the more we can establish boundaries through which it's discussed and promote a kind of media literacy that helps us distinguish between sexualization and sexual objectification. So sexualization also allows for women to subvert patriarchal norms. I don't know if anyone here knows Marina and the Diamonds. She has a song called How to Be a Heartbreaker, which subverts gendered power dynamics because she presents herself as a sexual agent in the video. The video is kind of like a tongue-in-cheek reversal of the typical depictions of women as sexual objects. Marina is surrounded by lots of muscled men whilst describing the virtues of breaking hearts, and she says, rule number 3, wear your heart on your sleeve. Rule number 3, wear your heart on your cheek, but never on your sleeve unless you want to taste defeat. And I think the lyrics are kind of a poignant commentary on ideas of the structure of relationships. So our society seems to think that women in relationships with men should be overly emotional and sacrificial, and Marina, through sexualization, is able to demonstrate the value of playful detachment, introducing more dynamic portrayals of the ways women can act and behave. So a little disclaimer, arguments that this is merely the sexual objectification of men assume that men and women exist on an equal basis already. They also ignore the fact that sexism is structural and not individual. So it's not the same thing because historically men have not been socially, politically, and economically and sexually disenfranchised. And so sexualized portrayals of them are not disempowering in the same way that overtly sexualized portrayals of women by men can be. In our society, I think it's also good to take into account the fact that men aren't viewed from a purely aesthetic viewpoint, whereas often a woman's value is derived from her appearance, so that's important. Number 3, the age of sexualization has allowed artists like Nicki Minaj to make cogent points about black women's sexuality. I think it's important to recognize how aspects of of identity intersect with this issue. So her video, Anaconda, was widely criticized by white feminists who didn't take into account how race intersects with sexualization. There's a long history of women of color, especially black women, being portrayed as hypersexual by men, and so Nicki's exploration and performance of sexuality in that video was a way to reclaim narratives absence of a kind of white male gaze, which is surely a good thing for society. And in the video, she cuts up phallic-shaped objects, so make of that what you will. I think the video also had a subversive quality. There are some lines in it that say, "Oh my God, look at her butt." But that comes from a song called, those lines come from a song called Baby Got Back by Sir Mix-a-Lot that came out in 1986. So again, demonstrating that sexual objectification is not a new phenomena. And at the beginning of Sir Mix-a-Lot's videos, 2 white women comment on the size and shape of a black woman's body, uttering those lines and arguing that she looks like one of those girls from the rap videos. And Minaj took that line and used it subtly in her own video, kind of satirically, and redirected and reclaimed the idea that black women's bodies or sexuality is alien or something to be marveled at. So sexualization there allowed her to reshape engagements with black women's bodies and interjected nuance into the portrayal. I think critiques of sexualization can be just another way of controlling women's sexuality. When we disapprove of the ways in which women choose to explore their sexuality through tools of shaming instead of the valid critiques that we can make on the basis of race, class, etc. And when we conflate sexual objectification with sexualization in an intellectually dishonest way, all we're doing is reconstructing ideas of normative behaviors that are defined by patriarchal norms. I think it's also important to take into account that sexualization isn't something that's forced onto every female artist. Arguably one of the biggest and most widely recognized singers of our generation, Adele, hasn't relied on explicit sexuality in order to garner success. So whilst it's true that record labels and companies have a lot of bearing on an artist's creative freedom, it's too simplistic to see women as puppets in a patriarchal music system, and therefore sexualization is something that's inherently bad or bad for society. I think it's good that that we have access to a wide number of women choosing to engage with sexuality in a number of different ways, some making it the focal point of their artistic creation and others choosing to explore other aspects of their identity. Increasing sexualization also helps us to explore non-conventional sexualities. So the more we're able to be comfortable with portrayals of sex, and this has happened because of instances of sexualization, the more we're able to subvert heteronormativity. So artists have begun to explore same-gender attraction and begun to depict more LGBT plus characters in their videos, and this wouldn't have happened in a society that was still repressed or shy or coy about sex and desires. So the process of sexualization allows artists to direct their desires, and more we see women projecting those desires onto non-male subjects. So Demi Lovato's Cool for the Summer, Hayley Kiyoko's Girls Like Girls, and Troye Sivan's new videos that have come out. So placing sex as part of the mainstream media helps us to deconstruct it and asks important questions about where our desires are being directed. So just to end, I think the notion that sexualization is bad for society is really simplistic, and it doesn't take into account the politics of women's body and also the history that they're trying to kind of reframe. And it's simply at risk of reproducing the sexual standards that women have had to conform to for centuries. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lola. Right, does anyone from the floor have a point they would like to make? As ever, we will start with proposition, that you think sexualization of the music industry is bad for society. No one at all? Okay, let's move on to op. Does anyone have any points in opposition of the motion? This is going well. I hope there's lots of stuff on Twitter. I don't have Twitter in front of me today, I'm sorry. So if you've made a point in the audience on Twitter, you're going to have to stand up and say it. But yeah, we'll go down at the front for opposition.
Hey, I'd just like to make a really simple point in opposition that the kind of sexualization and misogyny that faces women's bodies isn't a new thing. Like, there's this idea that negative lyrics, negative portrayals of women in music videos and songs is like this awful thing we need to combat, but actually I feel like men have had chances to kind of display misogyny throughout history through, like, even like you look at medieval poems and like old literature, like there's so much misogyny there, and actually like a sexualization of the kind of music industry is a way that actually what's happening there is radical in that it's women who are being empowered, and like, yeah, there are some sort of sexist views being given by men, but those aren't new. Like, there's nothing new or radical happening there. Whereas women being like able to own their sexuality is new and radical. So I feel like for men it's, okay, that's a real big generalization, but like for people who want to further misogyny, that's just part of the same process. But actually what's going on with women there is something new and like a kind of empowering thing. And I think that's kind of important.
Thank you. Do we have any points in abstention? That is, you want something clarified, you don't agree with either side yet, you think the motion is stupid. I can always rely on you for that, Richard. Is this on the last bit of the abstention point, that you think the motion is stupid?
Of course. Richard Parkins, Trinity College. Yes, I do think the motion is stupid. And the reason I think the motion is stupid is that it's saying that sexualization of the music industry is bad for society, and it's implying that it's the music industry that's influencing society rather than the other way round. The music industry is becoming sexualized because society is becoming sexualized. So it isn't the music industry's fault, it's got nothing to do with it.
I don't usually get a right of response, but I will say, in 2 weeks' time, they're going to be opening up motion suggestions for Michaelmas. And I would like you to suggest some motions that you don't think are stupid. Right, with that, we will head back to the main debate, and I will hand over to our second proposition speaker tonight. Charlotte Petter is the Murray Edwards Women's Officer, co-president of their FemSoc Society, and is also the current treasurer of the Cambridge Union. Charlotte, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
So I'm just going to start by saying that I had no idea that I'd be speaking here until about 2 hours ago. So yeah, just bear that bit in mind. I think it's really interesting that Richard just raised the notion of, is it a society problem or is it a problem with the music industry? And I think that that's actually something that's really relevant to the motion. And it's very easy to say that sexualization of the music industry is bad for society, and then to counter that with, is that bad for the society or is society bad for the music industry? And I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to answer that in a simple manner. It's chicken and egg, which came first, which is the problem, which is evidence of the problem. But something that we can't escape from that is that this culture has been sexualized, and we're accepting of that in some circumstances. So porn culture, I wouldn't say that we're necessarily accepting of porn culture, but most people would accept that that is a very sexualized industry, and the average age at which young boys in the UK first experience porn is now 9 years old. That in itself is perhaps a motion for Michaelmas, whether that's a problem, but that is a fact. And yet, therefore, can we argue that the sexualization of the music industry is a result of that, and therefore is it a problem with society, or is this porn culture the problem? But I think a real key distinguisher here is taking it beyond the women in the music industry and the direct impacts of them and whether or not they would like to sexualize their music. And I'm not saying that a woman who wants to sexualize her music should not do so. And that can be very empowering for women. I'm not arguing against that. But I think we need to look beyond that and look again at the impacts of the industry. No one is holding up porn stars like Sasha Grey as role models. However, women in the music industry, whether that's Taylor Swift with her relatively clean image, whether that's Miley Cyrus with her Wrecking Ball videos, these women become key role models for young women in our society. 11-year-old girls, 10-year-old girls watch these videos, listen to this music, and form their ideas of what is right, what is normal, what is acceptable upon these. Do we want a woman to feel that her value is based solely upon her sexualization, that she has to sexualize her body, her image, that her sole worth comes from her image? Because that is the message that a lot of these videos are sending. And I think that in many ways that is where some of the problems can lie, which is that if a woman wants to sexualize her music, yes, that can be very empowering. Yes, that can be a great sign of the sexual liberation of women. But it goes beyond that. And it goes beyond the woman's control very often. It's like this historic problem of the male gaze. How much of it is the woman's choice to sexualize herself and to do that, but at what point does that power leave her and transfer to the viewer? Those experiencing the music, watching the video, who has the power? If the woman can stand up and say, no, I have complete control over this, complete power of this, this is the image I want to portray, and because of that, I own this image. Anyone who wants to watch this, view this in a sexualized manner, is doing so because that is the image I'm putting out there, is one thing. But when women are subjected to this, through the rap videos of men, the videos of the likes of Robin Thicke with blurred lines, the uncensored video of which has several women in his videos stark naked, playing a guitar, standing there, looking pretty. No direct, crucial role to his video other than the entire basis of his lyrics, which are problematic in themselves. Just let me liberate you. Sorry, to come back to this idea of sexual liberation of women. He's singing about women's sexuality, and very clearly, explicitly doing so, but he's saying, just let me liberate you. At what point do women have the ownership of this? At what point is this a woman's ideal? At what point is this a woman's sexuality? If he's saying, you can have your sexual liberation, but I own it. I've written this song, I'm singing this song, this is my song, you are naked in this video because I want you to be naked in this video. I know you want it. You're a good girl. You're a good girl. Good girl is normally something that we associate with a clean image, pure image, girl next door, not that sexualized image of Robin Thicke video. That in itself could be really empowering. Open up the idea of a good girl beyond a clean image. Why can't a woman own her sexuality and still be good? Why should a woman's morality be linked in any way, shape, or form to her sexuality? But it's not, because who's singing this? Is it a woman? Is it empowering for women? No. I think this is where the heart of the argument can really lie, which is that if a woman writes her music, sings her music for women or for men, and within a safe female sphere, potentially with a female agent, designed for her, that is fine. But this problem is about the whole industry and the whole of society. And sadly, that goes so much further than a woman singing about her sexuality or women singing about sexuality for women. And we can't ignore that a vast majority of this has to do with the men, whether it's the men singing it, experiencing it, viewing it. A lot of the power still lies with the man. I think at this point I'm going to bring in Kesha. I'm sure many of you are aware of the Kesha case, whereby her producer, Dr. Lucas Sebastian Gottwald, has been accused by Kesha of repeatedly, over a course of 10 years, drugging and assaulting her. The case that she made was that Dr. Luke had sexually, physically, verbally, and emotionally abused Miss Sebert to the point where Miss Sebert nearly lost her life. That is a direct result of this industry. The reason she didn't speak out for so long is a direct result of this industry. He had created her image. He owned her image. He was her producer. He was a key part of her marketing team. How can we look at a case like that and ignore its inherent link to the sexualization of the industry and say that it's a good thing for society? Women don't own their bodies in the industry. It's fine to say women should own their bodies. Women own their bodies. We're in 2016. A woman's body is her own. But if it isn't, then this is a problem. Diane Warren, who is a Grammy award-winning songwriter, commented on the Kesha case. She's still signed to this guy. This is someone that still controls you. This was said in great praise of Kesha, saying how brave it was to come forwards with this allegation, bearing in mind that remark. But she raises an important point. Kesha's body, her image, her music is owned by Dr. Luke. That's why it's all been in the press again in the last fortnight. So her court injunction to produce music without him has just been denied in New York. That is the state, a great reflectant of society, I would say, literally saying, fine, you're accusing this man of sexual, verbal, physical, emotional abuse. But we're not going to let you exist beyond that in your industry. Fine, have a life. Fine, continue producing songs. But you have to stay tied to him. You have to stay tied to this man who you're accusing of ruining your life. If you want to stay in this industry, that's what you've got to do. And I just don't think that that is something we can endorse. I also think that this isn't going to stop becoming a problem until we stop valuing women on their appearance. This whole problem can be put down to that. The whole reason that so many young women entering the industry feel a need to sexualize their bodies, sexualize their music, is a large part of that. I came across some interesting statistics at the end of last year to do with a woman's appearance in the job industry and job market. A woman is 3 times more likely to get a job being interviewed by a male panel if she's wearing makeup. And a slim woman is 2 times more likely to get that job over her obese counterpart. I don't have statistics to hand for what it would be for men, and I know that men too are judged on their image. But that's not okay. A friend of mine from school used to work in retail, and just a Saturday job, and she went into work one day, and her manager said to her, "I'm really sorry, you can't come on the shop floor until you put some makeup on." In what male manager? In what world is a woman so dependent on her image? Yet we can argue that that is different from her sexualization. We can argue that that is different from this problem. That is society that everybody is facing every day. And sure, the music industry may only be one reflection of it, but it's an important reflection of it. It's a reflection of it that's very much in the public eye, in the media. And whether or not the society is bad for the industry or the industry is bad for society, I think we need to stop and consider the crux of the problem and allow a woman to exist beyond her body and beyond her image. And that is why I would urge you to vote in proposition of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Right, I will now hand over to our second opposition speaker, Glory Pearl, who quit her job as a private school teacher to become a naked stand-up comic and burlesque star, winning acclaim at the Edinburgh Festival. Glory, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I'm just going to take a minute to look at this side of the room. Put it in front of you. I feel a bit strange.
Can you get a mic over?
Yes, okay. It's a very pleasure
Did
to
you?
be here. Thank you for having me.
Give the mic.
So, in terms of this debate...
We're handing over a microphone.
Oh, that's more like it. I feel like a stand-up again. I'm happy now. Right, so how did I approach this debate? Well, kind of the way I approach everything, which is I thought about it for quite a long time, and then at about lunchtime today, I wrote some notes. So bear with me. But I did watch them MTV. That is an hour of my life that I'm never getting back. And I actually even watched a One Direction video. Yeah, it was for a song called Drag Me Down, and it did. Thank you. But in that video, it seemed to imply that the boys were about to go into space, an idea that actually struck me as wholly beneficial to Western civilization. We can hope. Okay, so my job tonight then is to oppose this motion, and I do, largely for the reasons you cited, actually. I think it's nonsense. But my opposition falls into 3 broad areas. As an ex-English teacher, I'm very fond of semantics, and I am a pedant, so bear with me. The first area is that this motion kind of implies that there is a process of sexualization and that somehow it's getting worse. It's ongoing and it's getting worse. The second implication in this motion is that the industry as a whole is being sexualized, not just the output of the industry. And the third area that I kind of object to is this notion of something being bad for society. I don't really know what that means. And also the idea that sexualization of anything is bad. That's always been quite a nice experience in my life. Anyway, enough about me. So the first point then, which is that there's a process of sexualization in the music industry and that it's getting worse. I think music's always been sexy. Whether you want to look at J. and As You Like It, If Music Be the Food of Love, play on. And right the way through, I've got some lyrics that I'd like to share with you, if you'll indulge me. It's from a song called When for Air I Take My Mare. You ready for this? When for air I take my mare and mount her first, she walks just thus, her head held low and motion slow with nodding, plodding, wagging, jogging, dashing, plashing, snorting, starting, whimsically she goes. Then whip stirs up, trot, 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 ambling, then with easy sleight, she wriggles like a bride at night. Her shuffling hitch regales my breech, whilst trot, 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 brings on the gallop, the gallop, the gallop, the gallop, and then a short trot, 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 straight again, up and down, up and down, up and down, still till she comes home with a trot, when night dark grows. Just so Phyllis, fair as lilies, as her faces, has her paces, and in bed too, like my pad too, nodding, plodding, wagging, jogging, dashing, plashing, flirting, spurting, artful are all her ways. Heart thumps, pit, pat, trot, 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 ambling, then her tongue gets loosed, while wriggling near I press more close. Ye devil, she cries, I'll tear your eyes, when mane seized, bum squeezed, I gallop, I gallop, I gallop, I gallop, and trot, 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 straight again, up and down, up and down, up and down, till the last jerk with a trot ends our love chase. That's from 1720. Yeah. From Thomas Durfee's collection, Pills to Purge Melancholy. Just to kind of make the point, really, that sex and music have always walked hand in hand. But I think if we look back to the middle of the 20th century, when the music industry, kind of as we understand it, it emerged, and I think that sex and the sexual appetites of young women, actually, were usually at the forefront of record companies' minds. Now, there are countless examples of sex driving record sales. In the 50s, we've got Elvis. In the 60s, we've got Beatlemania. We've got the Rolling Stones and that unfortunate incident with Marianne Faithfull in a Mars bar. In the 70s, if you don't know about it, Google it. You'll be surprised. Showing my age. In the 70s, we've got the groupie movement. People like Penny Lane. I don't know if anyone's ever read her autobiography. That's an eye-opener. Anyone who went near a Top of the Pops presenter in the 70s also. By the 80s, we've got a much slicker operation. We've got a whole industry surrounding pop. I remember reading smash hits in the 1980s as a small girl, where they tried to kind of sexualize Frankie Goes to Hollywood for a young teenage girl audience. And how naive I was. I had no idea they were all homosexuals. In the 90s, you know, the whole leather cap thing wasn't getting that influence at all. In the 90s, we've got the boy bands, Take That, all of those malarkeys. And it's still this way today, you know, if you look at people like One Direction, for example. We've got young male bodies presented to appeal to the libidos of young women. I mean, they've even tried it with Ed Sheeran, for God's sake. So this notion, and I think the assumption that's kind of been made a little bit tonight, is that sexualisation, we must be talking about women, and we must be talking about women's bodies, but that's not what we see. We do see some of that, yes, absolutely, but that's not all we see. We see the sexualisation of male bodies for female pleasure. Sex and music, I would argue, go together a bit like children's playgroups and failed CRB checks. It's a relationship as old... I don't know if I get away with that here or not. I think the audience is split. Oops. Should have left it out. There's a question mark by it. Anyway, we'll move on. Never mind. Try the material. If it worked, it would go into the Edinburgh show, but never mind. Okay, it's a relationship as old as time itself, and civilization is still standing, ladies and gentlemen. No thanks to the present government, obviously. That's kind of my first point, really. Sex and music, they've always gone together. My second point, which is that this motion implies that we're talking about the industry as a whole and not the output of the industry. And when I first read this motion, this is what came to mind. I thought, okay, if I walked into my average record label, would I find its employees fornicating on the desks? And I suspected not, but sadly, as my learned friend mentioned with the Keisha case, Keisha, I don't know, how do you pronounce it? Keisha, I thought it was Keisha. Kesha? Oh, whatever. All right, a short E, Kesha. With that case hitting the news this week, it does seem that in some cases, yes, this is going on, and allegedly with the help of date rape drugs, even in Dr. Luke's case, which is hugely unfortunate. But does that mean that the music industry is being sexualised? No, I would actually instead ask, is the sexual harassment of women in the music industry bad for society? And I'd have to say, no, the sexual harassment of women anywhere and everywhere is bad, full stop, regardless of the industry it occurs in. And it's this that we need to fight as a whole and not in silos, not to focus on specific cases and specific industries. Okay, that's that point done. The third one then. What is bad for society? Why is the sexualisation of anything bad for it? I guess for something to be bad for society, we're looking at something that affects everyone in that society, and which essentially leads to a destabilisation of that society or a harming of a substantial section of that society, maybe. So I have to ask then, does the music industry do that by simply implying that sexy time is on the cards in much of its output? I have to say, no, I don't think it does. I'm kind of with Lenny Bruce. I think, give me sex over violence any day. In fact, I found this quote. I don't know. Bearing in mind how the CRB check joke went down, I'm not sure I'm going to say this. But there's a Lenny Bruce quote. He says, "If a titty is pretty, it's dirty, but not if it's bloody and mutilated." Just think about that for a second. It's not a nice image, but actually our acceptance of violence in our society, for me, is far more problematic than our attitude towards sex and human sexuality. Why is sex bad? I don't think being sexual is a bad thing. I think it's human. And I think owning our sexuality is to be whole. What I would suggest is bad for society is the objectification of women in the wider culture. And I would absolutely agree that music videos are prime territory for that. But they sit alongside movies, pornography, magazines, the fashion industry, video games. I'd say what is bad for society is the relentless lack of diversity in the music industry, because it seeks broad appeal, largely. And I'm not really suggesting that one member of Little Mix being chunky of thigh counts. Why is this bad? It's also bad for society because it repeatedly suggests that 50% of the population exists solely for the gratification of the other 50%. And it's also bad for society because it suggests that a woman's value lies solely in her conforming to an arbitrary and idealised appearance and manner. So there are numerous examples of the poor representation of women in the output of the music industry. Whether it's the Crystals singing "He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss" in 1962, yes, that is a song, check it out, to Blurred Lines, and even back to Little Mix, their Black Magic video, which I watched this afternoon, and which gave me the rage, full on gave me the rage. Have you seen it? Yeah, it's shit, isn't it? I mean, so they're all geeky. I'll bore you with it, because it was up for a Brit, wasn't it? Yeah, it was up for a Brit. Believe this or not, best video, right? So whoever they are, 4 girls, they're geeky in the video, and the pretty girl in school kind of, fobs them all off. And one of them goes to the library, and a book falls on her head, and she opens it, and blue shit comes out, and they all get magical powers, and are transformed to looking super hot. And they go into school, and they see the girl that fobbed them off, and they make her smell bad and humiliate her in front of her boyfriend, so she runs away. And that's cause for celebration in the world of Little Mix. And I think that idea of girls humiliating each other in competition for a man's affection is pretty offensive to me. Do I think that it's evidence that the sexualisation of the music industry is bad for society? No. I think it's evidence of Little Mix making some bad choices. And I think to suggest this, so to suggest that sexualisation is the issue here, is kind of suggesting that it's not the real enemy. Because actually the real enemy is the goddamn patriarchy. And this simply is kind of missing the point, this motion, as far as I'm concerned. As long as we continue to miss the point, as long as we continue to focus on Nicki Minaj's Anaconda or Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball, we can't change things. We're looking at the wrong thing. And for those reasons, which kind of came out sounding vaguely more coherent than I thought they would, I would hope that you would join me in opposing the motion that this House believes the sexualisation of the music industry is bad for society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glory. Right, let's go back to the floor and hope we have marginally more success than last time. Do we have any points in proposition of the motion now we've heard 2 speakers? Still no, this is boding really badly for proposition. Do we have any points in opposition of the motion? Yeah, down at the front.
But there seems to be, there's a sort of assumption that, you mentioned the sexualisation of men, and there seems to be an assumption in all these videos that the women have to be sexual, whereas Justin Bieber has not been seen with a shirt on for about 5 years. And yet it is not presumed that he is trying to do it for a sexual purpose, whereas Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball, which is a video about her, like, devastated over a breakup where she is naked to show vulnerability, is automatically presumed that it is supposed to be a sexualised issue. And it's definitely part of a wider societal issue, in that if it's a bit, warm outside, a man can walk down the street without a shirt on, but I could be kicked out of a restaurant for trying to breastfeed a baby. But it's suggestive that everything that we watch and everything that we consume, there is an assumption that for women it has to be a sexual intention, whereas for men that's just not there.
Do you want to come back to that, Charlotte?
I don't think that anyone is arguing that everything a woman does is intentionally sexualized with intent. And I think that it is certainly a huge problem that a woman can't remove her clothes without being seen as a sexual object. The problem doesn't necessarily lie there as much as in the way that it is perceived by society. So that is, as you were saying, a problem with society, whereby society can't accept a woman's body without requiring it to be sexualized. But I also don't think that that is actually different from the motion and saying that the consumerist approach, the sexualized approach that society take to women's bodies is a good thing.
Go for it. Take the microphone first, though.
Is that not assuming that the onus should be on the woman rather than on society to make the change? Because to me, if there is a problem, if we're standing here and saying the problem with sexualization is that that's the way society has perceived it, then the problem is not that we're saying sexualization of the music industry is the problem. It should be a change in attitude rather than a change in the music industry or a need to... So sexualization, therefore, isn't inherently bad for society. Society is bad for itself.
Exactly, and I think that's what I was trying to get at when I was saying that is it a problem, is this, the sexualization of society is the key problem, and it's the chicken and the egg, which came first. But the problem lies with society, but is reflected badly upon the women. And that is not the fault of the women, but until we change that societal view, that's not going to change.
You can have one last response if you want it.
Okay, I think we're arguing the same thing,
Yeah.
but I'm just not sure
I
agree that the idea that the way to solve that problem is to end sexualization, is to suggest that sexualization is inherently bad, because sexualization, by your argument, in my interpretation of your argument, you're not arguing that sexualization is inherently bad.
No, I'm not.
We have
I
agreed.
think I'm there.
Yeah, okay.
And with the 2 sides of the debate agreeing, we will move into abstention, where we can all agree some more. And everyone wants to speak in abstention. We'll go down to the front here, because I know your hand was up very quickly. And then I will come to you, Laura, after.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Yeah, okay. So, sorry, I wrote this in my notes. I need to get it back up. Talk amongst yourselves, please. Okay, I'd like to propose that, well, I'm not proposing a motion, but I'd like to point out that this debate has very much talked about music videos and very much talked about the image of women. And I'd like to suggest that we're sort of heading towards that because the music industry as a whole has become much more image-based. I mean, we have a 24-hour news media that means that I can read an article about Taylor Swift leaving her house every single day on the Daily Mail if I want to. But we're not really talking about music anymore. We're talking about the female image in general, and I was wondering whether we could talk sort of more about what the contents of the music is and less about the music videos, if you see what I'm saying. Okay?
Laura, did you want to make a point on things that have been said in the floor speeches? Go for it. Over to you. You have a mic.
I'd just like to object to a statement that you made about, and I think I have this is quoted from what you said, women who exist in this industry don't own their bodies. And I'm a woman who exists in this industry, and I'm a sexual person with a sexuality, and I certainly own my body. So I'd just like to object.
Yeah, of course. Again, so that was also me quoting Diane Warren, and I don't think that's not a problem that I was saying is inherent in the industry. I think that came on the back of the Kesha case, and saying that because she is still tied to her producer, she can't break free from that. And with regards to that, because she is not allowed to break free from him, she's not allowed that autonomy over her music. She's not allowed, therefore, because it's linked to the allegations against him, and by tying her to him, she's not allowed to.
Right.
Laura? Yep.
Yeah. I'll just project, shall I?
You've got a microphone too.
Yeah, it doesn't...
Oh, that's true, sorry.
Yeah. Don't worry, I'm a classical trained actor.
Unfortunately, that doesn't help live stream, so James, could you bring the microphone over?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm with you. I object to that because I think very few artists in the music industry own their bodies. I mean, Prince famously changed his name to a symbol to object to the fact that his record company wouldn't let him negotiate out of his contract. I don't think this is necessarily a gendered issue, and so therefore I don't necessarily think it's about sexuality or sexualisation. I think it's just about contract law, which is sucky in the music industry.
Okay, do we have enough points from the floor that it is worth doing another round? Or is there general eagerness to make a point if we go back to proposition? Someone from the floor must make a point in proposition. We do, yeah. At the back here, please.
Sorry, this isn't a point either in proposition or opposition. It's more... I apologise.
I hate when people do that.
Just to point out that I feel like the sexualisation of the music industry isn't a problem in itself. I would just like to suggest that maybe it's more in the way that mainstream sexualised music is very accessible by and even marketed to children. So like the Anaconda video, that's not a problem in itself. If you've got a 10-year-old watching that, perhaps that is a problem. And I think it's maybe more in a way, it's more of a problem in the way that it's processed by young people than adults. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to head back to the main debate because I'm worried we're going to get more people speaking in abstention. And for those of you that didn't stick around for the results last week, abstention won. And I want to avoid that happening again. So without further ado, I will hand over to Ruby Holmes to close the case for the proposition. She is a hugely successful Cambridge debater who's represented us at Worlds and Euros. She runs the women's public speaking workshops here and is also a massive Laura Marling fan. Ruby.
So I'm going to start my speech by actually defending James's motion, because I don't think we have to defend that the sexualisation of the music industry is the only thing that's bad for society, or even that it might be the worst thing that's bad for society, or even that otherwise society might be fine. I think we have to say that there are things that this music industry does to this society which have bad effects for people living in it. And yes, a lot of that is the fault of the patriarchy and the fault of racism, but that doesn't mean that things that happen in the music industry don't make the lives of people materially worse, and that's what I'm going to try and do in this speech. So I'm going to try and move beyond the debate it's very easy to have, where our side decries Robin Thicke and the other side lionises Nicki Minaj, because I think that the difference between sexualisation and objectification is important if you are the person being sexualised or objectified. But if you are a consumer of that media, that is a distinction which is very easily elided by a capitalist music industry, which is why if you're watching Nicki Minaj, the subtlety of a lyric from 20 years before you were born might be lost on you, but the idea that one kind of body shape and one way to enjoy sex is the feminist or empowered one might not be. So that's what I'm going to try and do in this speech. But firstly, I don't think it matters if the music industry or culture has always been sexualized, because society has always been fucking sexist. I don't think that's a point for opposition, because I think it's been bad all along, and we should try and make things better. Okay, so firstly, who has power in the industry? And this, I think, is going to clarify this idea of who owns whose bodies in the music industry. Because obviously all of us own our bodies, but that doesn't mean that there aren't structural things within the music industry, which means that people, specifically young women in, for example, R&B, who are willing to do certain things, get access to agents and to the music industry, and women who aren't willing to do those things feel like they may not be. Which is why, even if for Beyonce, it is hugely empowering to sexualize yourself and make an absolute fortune off it, like no one is denying that Rihanna is winning, that doesn't mean that for young women coming into the industry, young men coming into the industry, it doesn't create a huge pressure to do things that you might not otherwise be willing to do. Because you know that if you're not willing to wear that outfit, there's someone else with a pretty voice who probably would. And the fact, we can see that this escalates by the fact that we can see that it's escalated in some areas of the music industry and not others. So for example, folk is not an area in which young women are regularly sexualized, but that's because young women in the folk industry aren't competing with other young women who are willing to do that. Whereas in R&B, for example, if you're not willing to like slut drop in the music video, somebody else will be, and like your cultural power is just not enough. But secondly, and importantly for my argument, even if it is a choice, it's just not a choice that is open to all women. Like not all women will be equally successful sexualizing themselves in the music industry, because society teaches us that some women are sexy and some women aren't. And that's why this isn't a choice that women get to make that is politically neutral and valuable only to them, because it's not a choice that is open to all women. It's not open to fat women. It's not open to most women of colour. It's not open to disabled women. It's not open to women who just don't want to do that, who want to express power in other ways. So I think this has harmful effects on society in general in several ways. Firstly, in terms of the way that young women view their body, because sexualization is only empowering if you live in a society that tells you that you're sexy. Sexualization is only empowering if you get to join in and be sexy. But if all you do is see women who don't look like you being talked about in a degrading way by men who wished you looked like those women, that is not an empowering thing. That is a tiring thing. That is a demoralizing, exhausting thing to live in a world which says that every aspect of your body and your voice is wrong because you don't look like Beyonce. But crucially, even where we have a body positivist response, like Lola wanted to talk about with Nicki Minaj, it's always at the expense of some other group of women. Like when Meghan Trainor is singing that like chunky women are beautiful, what she says is, "I'm bringing booty back, go tell those skinny bitches that." It's still women fighting other women for the approbation, probably, of men. And I think that's a bad thing for the way that women view their bodies, because the music industry is such a culturally important part of the world. But also because most of the powerful women who we see, most of the women with cultural power who we see, are in the entertainment industry, as actresses or as musicians, which is why it matters what Rihanna does. It matters that Rihanna is sexualized, or Miley Cyrus is sexualized, in a way that it matters much less if Justin Bieber is sexualized, because we see other men doing other things than Justin Bieber in the world, but we actually don't see that many women talking about science or politics or whatever else in our popular culture in the way that we do with men. So what does that mean? It means that the holders of female cultural power, when they come through a music industry that is predominantly sexualized, are predominantly sexualized themselves. So even when Taylor Swift talks about feminism, she does it in a way which is associated with her sexual power. The same is true for Beyonce. And this sexualizes female power in society in a way that is, one, not open to most women. Like, it would not have the same effect if I walked down the street in my underwear holding a placard about the pay gap as it would when Beyonce stands in front of a sign that says feminist, right? That is not cultural power that is open to anyone except Beyonce. We can't all be Beyonce, and it makes me sad, right? But two, because it drowns out other voices. Because sex sells, and it sells so well, it just does drown out other voices, because it's much harder to make a song like Marina and the Diamonds, for example, that mocks that. Marina and the Diamonds has never reached that level of success because she doesn't have access to the same level of promotion and of cultural power as she would if she were Beyonce. But thirdly, because like most of the things that we need female cultural power or feminism for cannot be made sexy. It is not sexy to make an argument about childcare and how that holds women out of the workplace. It is not sexy to make an argument about rape culture, about rape crisis centres getting shut down. It is not sexy to be the really earnest person in the debate who doesn't get to make jokes about 17th century poetry because she has to talk about fucking patriarchy, right? And this is why we need female cultural power to be about more than Taylor Swift talking about her squad, right? So that's the gendered aspect of this. But there's also a really, really, really strong racial aspect of this, which I find like really, truly depressing. Because even more than most of the women we see on TV being in the entertainment industry, most of the black men we see on TV are rappers. And certainly the examples of black social mobility, particularly in America, come from rappers. If you can think of anyone black who's come from real poverty and made it to real money, they're almost certainly a rapper. Which means that these people have like two sets. These people have power in two directions. Firstly, when this is the image of black masculinity which is portrayed in popular culture, the fact that Kanye's album is like stuffed full of lyrics like, we got this bitch shaking like Parkinson's, or it's too many hoes in this house of sin. There aren't like counter narratives about what it means to be a successful black man in the world, which means that some black men are likely to take that up, and that's regrettable. But I think more visibly and more obviously is that it like just gives racists the opportunity to say that black people are sexist, and that's a bad thing, and it's bad for society, and we shouldn't let that happen. Because while like Eminem has cultural power, he doesn't have the same disproportionate cultural power as, for example, Kanye, because Eminem isn't speaking for all white men when he writes lyrics like, if she ever tries to leave again, I'm going to tie this motherfucking bitch to the bed and set the house on fire or whatever, right? He's not speaking for white men, he's just speaking for Eminem because white men get to speak for themselves. But when Kanye says appalling things, everyone like gets up in arms about black culture being sexist, and that's really regrettable because it makes it impossible to have a real argument about, for example, the position of black women in society, or even like the structural reasons that might lead to a black counterculture, which some people find distasteful. I think that's bad for society in lots of ways. But lastly, sex and relationships, and what it's like to live in a world where you encounter lyrics all the time which sexualize women. They don't and objectify them. It's not women gaining from their own sexual power. It's not women empowering other women to make choices, even limited ones. It is men writing lyrics about the awful things they want to do to women. And I just find it really depressing to live in a world where, especially with something like relationships, where no one tells you what relationships looks like. You pick it up in cues from your friends, from your family, and from things you hear in the media, in which you learn what a healthy relationship looks like and what you might expect going into a relationship as a young person. And when you hear lyrics like Eminem's, and when you hear people talk about women in the way that Kanye or whoever else does, it just is normalising in a way which means that when you look up to Kanye and you see him as a cultural icon, it matters the way he talks about women, and it matters the way he sexualizes them. Like, ultimately, there are many, many things wrong with society, and there are many, many excuses that people can give for their atrocious behavior towards women, or for the way that young women are made to feel in a society that tells them that their bodies are wrong and their minds are worthless because they don't speak with the right voice and they don't speak from behind the right clothes. And the music industry is has an unusual cultural potency in that we're not critical of it because we think it's about music, but actually it's about culture. And we're not critical of it because we think it's about beats and notes, but actually it's about the way that we know each other and the way that we speak to each other. And so when some women get to make a lot of money out of being sexualized, that's good for them. But the rest of us all suffer because of their free choices when we live in a world which understands women in those terms. And that's why sexualizing the music industry sexualizes the whole society just a tiny bit more than it was already, and I think we get to regret that. Please propose.
Thank you very much, Ruby. Right, to hand over to our final opposition speaker to close the debate, Laura Marling is a folk singer-songwriter and musician. She won the Brit Award for Best Female Solo Artist in 2011, was nominated in 2012, and again in 2014. She may also be a massive Ruby Holmes fan.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying that I agree with this gentleman. I think the wording of this debate is quite strange. And so I'd like to dissect some of the key words before I begin. Sexualisation, to make something sexual in character or quality. Music industry, a broad, faceless, nameless organisation exchanging money, music for money. Bad, the implication of something having negative effect or influence. And society, the structure in which we live together. This resolution suggests that music industry is having some negative form of moral influence upon society, corrupting our young minds, confronting us with the obscene, or playing upon our sexual desires for profit. And I propose that none of these things are inherently negative. I have three main contentions, which I'll present to you and then expand on them later. The first is that music industry and society are biodirectional, meaning that they have mutual effect upon one another. And as industry is a product of the society from which it has sprung, it is incorrect to suggest that the music industry can be held responsible for negative moral influence. Secondly, that what sexualisation of the music industry has done in conjunction with its biodirectional nature or relationship with society has been of vital importance to our levels of tolerance and freedom of expression. And thirdly, that music's biological and evolutionary purpose is for sexual union. And I'd like to start broadly with the point of art. And I identify not as a musician working in the music industry. I identify as an artist working on planet Earth. And a musician identifying as an artist is not something we're very comfortable with in this country because it's not very English. As if to describe oneself as an artist is to insist that one's work is worthy without criticism or without permission. And I think as if to say that art doesn't exist without its critic. And I think that's a really important point in the context of this debate because so much of art is a really crucial debate about what it is to be human. The definition of art, according to dictionary.com, is an expression of human nature according to our aesthetic principles of what is beautiful, appealing, or of more than ordinary significance. And I think that's so wonderful. An expression of human nature exciting us, Freudian slip, inciting us into the creative act. And of course, the ultimate creative act is childbirth or a human lifespan. We are all living, breathing works of art, and we all begin with sex or at least sexual impulse. So sex and art are mutual. Sex and industry are perhaps not so much, but sex and music industry certainly, they have links. And I'd like to raise again the point regarding the implied influence of music industry over society in the title of this debate. I propose that industry is in fact a reflection of the society from which it's sprung. And what I mean by this is that our values as a society or an industry are in a state of continual and mutual influence growth, consecrated by our demands and consumption as individuals. And we mustn't forget that we are individuals and we have choice by our demands. At what point do we give industry the power to dictate our morals? This is perhaps a more appropriate wording for consumerist influence. It is when we cast our capitalist vote with our choice of purchase, and we are responsible for what is reflected back at us through industry. This raises another interesting inference within this resolution, because it is, of course, genderless, and overwhelmingly this evening it has been focused on the female issue. And sex does become a feminine issue. And the commodification of sex, as we're referring to it here, does become a feminine issue. So do we believe that sexualized women or woman, whoever she may be, is in charge of her sexuality? And this is the great Miley Cyrus debate. And the undertone of sexism around this debate I found deeply, deeply saddening and depressing and tragic. But what is encouraging is the very fact that the subject is raised, because Miley Cyrus brought up to our faces, literally, an important grey area of who sexualises who. And I believe that she chose to express her sexuality in a way that felt true to her. And the great joke was that we were so appalled by it that we couldn't take our eyes off her. And in doing so, she has empowered us and our understanding of whether sexualization is inherent in suggestively sexual acts, which leads us to what we consider to be obscene. Our boundaries with this are moving very quickly and clumsily as we renegotiate our ethics to match the supersonic speed at which technology is giving us access to all areas. But sex and sexuality in themselves are not inherently obscene. They're in fact intrinsic and vital expressions of humanity. And in breaking down and removing the censorship of sexuality, we are lifting the casting of shame from ourselves and having a more honest relationship with sex. So sexualization is a force for good. Sexualized music and music videos played a vital role in the progression of LGBT rights. And I'd like to give you an example from my own life, one that I'm not particularly proud of. And that is in 2002, Christina Aguilera, who is not someone I thought I'd be divining influence from, ever, but I did. Nonetheless, a multi-million album-selling artist released a music video for her song Beautiful, in which featured short clips of societal outcasts defying their stigma. Included in these clips were 2 homosexual men kissing and a transgender woman dressing in the mirror. And I remember watching this in my school break room in Reading, age 13, and it was completely and utterly radical to me. And in my sheltered middle-class life, there was no chance at that point in my life I would have encountered any of these things firsthand. I'm happy to say that 13 years have since passed, and these images won't be nearly so radical to our new generation of teens because we have broken the censorship boundary and allowed our children to understand more fully the sexual preference and diversity of others, and most importantly, perhaps themselves. In 1972, David Bowie, whose stage persona Ziggy Stardust was deeply wrapped up with gender and sexual ambiguity, declared himself openly gay. And may I remind you that homosexuality or sodomy was illegal in Britain until 1967, and in Scotland until 1980. I couldn't believe that when I found that on Wikipedia. So to declare oneself openly homosexual in that time was still incredibly radical. And now, of course, I can't believe she hasn't come up earlier, but we turn to Our Lady Madonna. I think she came up briefly. But in 1991, in an interview with Good Morning America, Madonna, author of the book Sex and long-serving LGBT rights activist, when proposed the idea that many people found a section of her tour documentary, Truth or Dare, offensive because she devoted some time to the somewhat graphic understanding of gay relationships and gay rights, she responded, "This is life. I am representing life to people. These things exist, but people don't want to look at them. However, if you can keep putting something in someone's face, maybe they can come to terms with it." Music reflects society, and sometimes in a really pointless, trivial way, as some examples have come up this evening, but sometimes in a really, really important way, and this is a fantastic use of sexuality for sexuality. And I believe women's rights to exercise their sexuality in art is a vital freedom of expression, and does not impose itself upon us, but rather liberates us to consider our own sexuality. And the removal of perceived sexual boundaries, especially those around gender, free us from our limited understanding of sexuality. Finally, music, sex, evolution, and biology are inextricable. Sexual interactions strengthen the bonds of trust in groups, studies have shown, and nowhere more than in our pre-monogamous ancestors. It was only when we became monogamous, created agriculture, formed nuclear families, that commodities and property became competitive, and this great trouble began. And the trouble is that our true instincts are completely at odds with society. As it stands. And it is society's demonization of our true nature that has harmfully impacted our relationship with the sexual, and therefore to each other. And music reminds us of our true nature and transcends this, which is incredible. Listening to music reduces testosterone in men and increases it in women, decreasing sexual urges in men and increasing it in women. And make of that what you will, but that's another vital link to music and sexuality. So in conclusion, sexualization of the music industry has been an indisputable force for good in the evolution of LGBT rights. And sexualization with music is a vital part of its evolutionary function. And the morality of society is reflected in its individual consumer demands. Thank you.